It was a text message. That's all it took. One stupid, careless text, and my life flipped upside down in less than 3 seconds. I was sitting at the kitchen table, finishing up some work emails, when her phone buzzed. It was just sitting there, face up on the counter, glowing with a message I wasn't supposed to see. Amy had gone upstairs for a shower, leaving her phone unattended, like she didn't expect anyone to notice. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, winky face." That little winking emoji felt like a punch in the gut. My heart stopped. I stared at the screen, trying to convince myself it was innocent. Maybe it was her friend being cheeky, or something work-related I didn't understand. But the sender's name didn't belong to any of her friends or co-workers. Matt. Who the hell was Matt? For a second, I froze. My hands were shaking, and my mind raced with 1,000 scenarios. Was this really happening? Had I become that guy, the one who's oblivious while his wife is sneaking around behind his back? I could hear the water running upstairs, Amy singing along to some playlist, completely unaware of what she'd just left out in the open. My mind went to war with itself. Should I confront her right now? Pretend I didn't see it? Or should I dig deeper? My gut screamed at me to do the one thing I swore I'd never do, snoop through her phone. And that's exactly what I did. I grabbed her phone, heart pounding like I'd run a marathon. My thumb hovered over the screen, hesitating, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. But the cliff wasn't going anywhere. So, I jumped. The message from Matt was still open, staring back at me with that stupid wink. My finger slid down to open the thread, and that's when the floor dropped out from under me. This wasn't a one-off. This wasn't just some flirty misunderstanding. It was a full-blown affair, an ongoing conversation filled with inside jokes, late-night confessions, and worse, plans. Plans to meet up. Plans to see each other when it's safe. I scrolled up, and there it was, in black and white. Everything I had been ignoring, every suspicious moment, every excuse she made, it was all spelled out in a string of texts that seemed to go on forever. Matt, last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about it. Amy, same here. I wish we could have stayed longer. I felt sick. Physically sick. Like my stomach had twisted itself into a knot that wasn't going to untangle anytime soon. Last night? I racked my brain, trying to remember where she had been. She told me she was at her mom's, dropping off some things. She even showed me a photo of them together, smiling in her mom's kitchen, which I now realized must have been taken weeks ago. I had believed her without a second thought. Like an idiot. My hands were shaking now, but I kept going. I scrolled further up, seeing months of texts. Not days, not weeks, months. Matt, you looked so hot today, even in that meeting. I could barely focus. Amy, LOL, stop it. But thanks, winky face. You didn't look too bad yourself. Meeting? I tried to place it. Amy had told me she was going to some work conference 2 weeks ago. She had seemed so excited about it, talking about networking and learning new strategies for her business. I remember feeling guilty that I hadn't shown more interest, that I hadn't asked more questions. Turns out I was giving her all the freedom she needed to sneak around. The thing that hit hardest was how normal she had acted. Just yesterday, we'd had breakfast together. She'd kissed me goodbye before running out the door to work like it was any other day. There were no signs, no warnings, nothing that screamed, "Hey, your wife's banging someone else behind your back." The sheer normalcy of it all made me feel like an absolute fool. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The house was quiet, the kids were asleep upstairs, and Amy was just in the shower, completely oblivious to the bomb she had just detonated in our living room. I stared at the phone, at the endless stream of texts that I could barely process. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to get the hell out of there before I did something I couldn't take back. I put the phone down gently, like it might explode if I handled it too roughly. My mind was racing. I had a million questions, but none of them made sense. How long? Why? Why the hell didn't I notice sooner? What did this guy have that I didn't? I walked out the back door, onto the patio, and let the cool night air hit my face. I took deep breaths, trying to steady myself, but nothing worked. I paced back and forth like some caged animal, trying to figure out what to do next. Do I confront her right now? March up to the bathroom and throw her phone in her face, demanding an explanation? Or do I wait, bide my time, gather more proof? Proof. That's what I needed. This couldn't just be some dumb mistake where I blow up our entire marriage because of one text message. I needed to know how deep this went. I needed to be sure. I needed more than just a gut feeling if I was going to destroy everything we had built. So I went back inside. The water was still running upstairs. I grabbed my laptop and sat down at the kitchen table, my head spinning. I knew her passwords. Amy wasn't exactly secretive about that stuff. We'd always been open with each other, or so I thought. I logged into her email. The first thing I saw was a confirmation for a hotel reservation. A hotel I didn't know about. Date, 2 days ago. Location, some cheap place just outside of town. I felt like I'd been sucker punched. So it was real. It wasn't just some stupid flirtation. They were meeting up, right under my nose. And I'd been clueless, trusting, blind. The next thing I did was check her calendar. Sure enough, there it was, a meeting she didn't mention. She'd marked it as work-related, but I knew better now. I started searching through everything, her emails, her social media, anything I could think of. It didn't take long to piece it all together. They had been meeting for months. Anytime she said she had to run errands, anytime she said she had a late meeting or was seeing friends, it was him. It was always him. I could feel my blood boiling. How could she do this? How could she just smile in my face every day and pretend everything was fine while sneaking around with this guy? I thought about the last time we'd been intimate, the last time she'd touched me, kissed me like she actually meant it. Had she been thinking about him the whole time? How long had she been lying to me? The sound of the shower shutting off snapped me back to reality. She was coming downstairs, and I needed to get my head straight. I couldn't let her know I'd seen everything, not yet. I needed to figure out my next move. I put her phone back exactly where it was and closed my laptop. I sat back down at the table, trying to look normal, like nothing had changed. My heart was racing, but I had to keep it together. When she walked into the kitchen, she looked the same as always, hair damp, face relaxed from the shower. She smiled at me, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just destroyed everything with one stupid text. "Hey," she said, grabbing her phone from the counter. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "Everything's fine." And that was it. She had no idea that I knew. She had no idea that I'd just spent the last 30 minutes reading every dirty, disgusting detail of her affair. I watched her go about her evening, texting, scrolling through her phone, acting completely normal. But nothing was normal anymore. I couldn't believe how easily she slipped back into our routine, like she wasn't sneaking around behind my back. I felt like I was living in some kind of twisted parallel universe where she was living two lives, one with me, her husband, the father of her kids, and one with Matt, the guy she was screwing on the side. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, going over everything in my head. The lies, the deceit, the betrayal. It was like a movie playing on a loop, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shut it off. In the morning, she kissed me goodbye on her way out the door. I stood there, watching her leave, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. I had spent the entire next day on autopilot. The kids were up, dressed, and ready for school before Amy even made it downstairs. She mumbled something about having a busy day and not feeling great, and I just nodded, pretending to be the husband she thought she could lie to without consequence. But my insides were on fire. Amy left the house without a second glance. I could tell she was distracted, not entirely there. Maybe she was thinking about Matt. Maybe she was thinking about their next meeting. Either way, I wasn't on her mind. And for the first time, I could feel myself disconnecting from her, like my brain was already preparing for the explosion that was about to come. I spent the morning plotting. Every thought I had went back and forth between fury and cold, calculating calm. The calm part won, for now. I wasn't going to be the guy who freaked out and lost everything in one reckless moment. No. I wanted to see her squirm. I wanted her to try and explain her way out of this, to trip over her lies as she realized I knew everything. But mostly, I wanted her to understand that there was no going back to the way things were. I called off work, made sure the kids were staying with my parents for the night, and waited. My hands were clenched into fists most of the day, but I couldn't bring myself to feel anything except cold resolve. There was no fear anymore, no sadness. Just anger. By the time Amy walked back through the front door that evening, the house was silent, and I was sitting at the dining room table with a glass of whiskey in front of me. I hadn't touched it yet. It was there for effect, something to throw her off balance the second she saw me. The way I figured, if she didn't realize something was wrong as soon as she came in, she was either a bigger idiot than I thought or simply didn't care anymore. She came in, setting her bag down by the door, like it was any other night. Her shoes clicked on the hardwood floor as she walked toward me. I looked up, catching her eye just as she froze, seeing the look on my face. That was when she knew. The smile she had walked in with evaporated in a second. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice already starting to crack. I didn't answer at first. I just watched her. Watched how she shifted her weight, how her eyes darted to the whiskey, then back to me. She was starting to piece it together, but I wanted to savor the moment when the realization really hit. "Amy," I said slowly, my voice low, but steady. "Who the hell is Matt?" The color drained from her face. She blinked, mouth opening, then closing again like she was trying to find the right words. Words that wouldn't come. "What?" she stammered, clearly caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "Whose?" "Don't," I cut her off, holding up my hand. "Don't even try. I know." She stood there, frozen, her mouth half open, her eyes wide. For the first time in months, she didn't have a script to follow. She wasn't prepared for this moment because she never thought it would come. "I read the texts," I said, voice barely above a whisper, but it hit her like a slap. "All of them. You want to lie to me? You want to try and dig yourself deeper into this mess? Go ahead. But don't you dare pretend you don't know who the hell I'm talking about." Her eyes flicked down to her phone, still in her hand, and she tightened her grip on it instinctively, like she was trying to protect it from me. The panic was clear now, flooding her face. For a few moments, she just stood there, like a deer caught in headlights. And then, suddenly, the words came spilling out, fast and defensive. "It's not what you think. Stop." I slammed my fist down on the table, making the whiskey glass rattle. "Don't insult me with that bullshit, Amy. It's exactly what I think. I've read every word." "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said quickly, stepping forward, her voice trembling now. "I didn't plan any of this. I don't even know how it started. Save it." I stood up from the table, the chair scraping against the floor. "You don't get to act like this just happened. You made choices. You chose to lie to me. You chose to sneak around behind my back. And now, you're trying to what? Play the victim? Cry your way out of this?" "I'm not," she said, her voice cracking. "I know I fucked up, okay? But it's not like I meant to hurt you. Not like you meant to hurt me?" I repeated, my voice rising. I could feel the anger bubbling up, ready to boil over. "You've been sleeping with another man for months, Amy. How the hell do you think that's going to end, if not with me being hurt?" She took another step closer, her hand outstretched like she was trying to reach me, but I backed away. The last thing I wanted was her touching me. "I was lonely," she said, her voice soft now, almost pleading. "I didn't know how to talk to you about it. I felt like we were drifting apart. Like you didn't want me anymore." "That's your excuse?" I shot back, incredulous. "You were lonely, so you decided the best solution was to find some guy and screw him instead of talking to your husband?" You didn't think to come to me with that? You didn't think to mention that you were unhappy before you jumped into bed with someone else? I didn't mean for it to go that far, she whispered, her eyes welling up with tears. Matt was there, and he listened to me, and I don't know how it got to this point, but I never wanted to hurt you, I swear. I stared at her, feeling nothing but disgust. Disgust at her, at the situation, and at myself for not seeing it sooner. I had spent years trusting her, loving her, and now all I could see was the person who had stabbed me in the back. You think I care about your excuses? I asked, my voice low and hard. You think I give a damn about why you did it? You cheated. You lied. That's it. That's all that matters. She flinched like I had hit her, the tears spilling down her face now. She tried again to reach out to me, but I stepped back again, holding up my hand. No, I said firmly. You don't get to cry your way out of this. You don't get to act like you're the victim here. I didn't do this. You did. And now you're going to have to live with that. Her lip trembled, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then the image of her laughing with this guy, Matt, flashed through my mind, and any sympathy I had evaporated. I never wanted this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know why I did it. You don't know why? I laughed bitterly. I'll tell you why. Because you're selfish. Because you didn't give a damn about me or the kids or anything except what you wanted in that moment. That's why. Her face crumpled, and she collapsed into the nearest chair, burying her face in her hands. I stood there, watching her sob, feeling nothing. No sympathy. No sadness. Just a cold, bitter rage. I'm sorry, she whispered between sobs. I'm so sorry. I shook my head, the sound of her crying barely registering. Sorry doesn't fix this, Amy. Sorry doesn't make up for months of lies. Sorry doesn't undo what you've done. She didn't say anything, just sat there, crying into her hands like she was the one who'd been betrayed. I wanted to scream at her, to shake her, to make her understand what she had done. But what was the point? She knew. She had to know. I walked over to the door, grabbing my jacket off the hook. I'm leaving, I said, my voice flat. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. Please don't go, she whispered. Please. We can work through this. We can. No, I said, cutting her off. We can't. She started crying harder, but I didn't care. I was done. Done with the lies, done with the excuses, done with everything. I'm staying with my brother tonight, I said as I opened the door. Don't wait up. I didn't look back as I left the house, the sound of her sobs echoing behind me. I walked out into the night, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me, but at the same time, feeling lighter than I had in months. This was only the beginning. Leaving the house that night should have felt like some grand escape, but all it did was fill me with a cold sense of clarity. I knew what had to happen next, and there was no going back. Amy had crossed the line, and no amount of tears or apologies was going to fix that. Now, I wasn't just some guy whose wife had cheated on him, I was a man with a plan. I drove around aimlessly for a while, trying to think through everything. The rage was still there, bubbling under the surface, but now it had purpose. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for her to cry herself into my forgiveness. No, that was done. There was no forgiveness coming. What I needed was payback. I wasn't the kind of guy who believed in simply moving on. She was going to feel the pain she caused, and I'd make sure of that. After a couple of hours, I ended up at my brother's place. He opened the door, surprised to see me standing there, but one look at my face, and he knew something was wrong. We didn't talk much, he offered me a beer, and I accepted. I told him the basics. Amy had been cheating, and I was done. He didn't ask for more details, and I was grateful for that. I wasn't ready to explain everything yet. That night, lying on his couch, I came up with the plan. Amy wasn't just going to get away with this. She had shattered my life, and I was going to make sure hers crumbled in the process. Every single bit of pain she caused me would come back to her tenfold. I had to be smart about it. Emotional outbursts wouldn't do. I needed something colder, something calculated. I stayed with my brother for a few days, long enough for Amy to get a taste of what life without me would be like. She tried calling and texting constantly, but I ignored every message. I needed her to stew in her guilt and confusion, to wonder what I was thinking. Let her sit there in that big, empty house and think about all the nights she lied to my face, all the times she smiled while sneaking behind my back. But revenge had to be more than just leaving her alone. That wouldn't be enough. I needed to make sure she felt the consequences of what she'd done, not just emotionally, but financially, socially, every way possible. So, I started digging. Amy wasn't exactly the best at covering her tracks. She thought she was, of course, sneaking around with her lover, using a burner app to hide her calls and texts, but she forgot about all the other ways people leave trails. I wasn't tech-savvy for nothing, and this was where all those years of working with computers paid off. It didn't take long to gather everything I needed. First, I hacked into her email. It was easy, she used the same passwords for everything. I started downloading every incriminating message, every meet you here or can't wait to see you tomorrow that she had stupidly left behind in her inbox. I forwarded all the relevant ones to my private email, making sure I had a clear record of her infidelity. Next, I accessed her social media accounts. Most of it was the usual stuff, pictures of the kids, family events, nothing out of the ordinary. But then I found the private messages, conversations between her and Matt. They had been careful not to comment or like each other's public posts, but in private, it was all there. Flirty messages, photos I hadn't seen before, plans for secret meetups. I screenshot everything and saved it in a folder labeled evidence. But the real prize came when I hacked into her business accounts. Amy's business was small, but it was profitable. She sold handcrafted jewelry and did well enough to support herself, which meant she had her own bank accounts, her own PayPal, all of it separate from mine. She always insisted on keeping her finances private, saying she wanted to handle it herself. Now, I knew why. She had been siphoning off more than I realized, probably spending it on her affair. I printed out her bank statements, highlighting every suspicious withdrawal, every hotel booking, every extravagant dinner that couldn't be explained away as a business expense. I even found a few receipts for gifts she had bought Matt, expensive things she had never spent on me. The whole time I kept telling myself that this was what she deserved, that she had it coming. When I had everything ready, I set the next part of my plan in motion. I wasn't just going to confront her with this and hope for the best. I wanted her entire world to come crashing down. So I arranged for the right people to see what I had found. First, I sent an anonymous tip to the tax office, showing that Amy had been underreporting her business income. It was true, too, she had always fudged the numbers a little to avoid paying too much in taxes. Now, she'd have an audit on her hands. That would keep her busy. Next, I made sure her social life took a hit. Amy had always been the more social one in our relationship, making friends everywhere she went. Well, those friends were about to get an eyeful. I created a new email account, attached all the screenshots of her messages with Matt, and sent it to a handful of her closest friends. No explanation, no note, just the cold, hard proof of what she'd been up to. Let them deal with the fallout. Finally, I hit her where it hurt most, her family. Amy's parents adored me, always did. They thought I was the perfect husband, and for 12 years, I had been. So I made sure they knew exactly what their perfect daughter had been doing behind my back. I sent them the messages, the receipts, everything. I didn't hold back. I wanted them to see her for what she really was, a liar, a cheat, a manipulator. I wanted her to walk into their house and feel the judgment, the shame. I wanted her to have to explain herself to them, to face their disappointment. By the end of the week, I had set everything in motion. All that was left was to sit back and watch it unfold. I wasn't going to be the one who blew up her life in some dramatic confrontation. I didn't need to. The truth was out there now, and it was going to do all the work for me. On Friday night, I finally decided to go home. I walked through the front door like I hadn't just spent the past few days tearing Amy's world apart piece by piece. She was sitting on the couch, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She jumped up as soon as she saw me, rushing over to me with tears streaming down her face. "Where have you been?" she sobbed, grabbing at my arm. "I've been trying to call you. I've been so worried." I gently pushed her away, walking past her like she wasn't even there. I set my keys down on the table, took off my jacket, and then turned to face her. "I know," I said calmly. "I've been busy." "Busy?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "What do you mean? Why didn't you come home?" I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter as I stared at her. "Because I was giving you time to think," I said. "And time to realize that your little secret isn't a secret anymore." Her face crumpled, and she burst into tears again. "I'm sorry," she cried, falling to her knees in front of me. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please, we can fix this." "We can." "Fix this?" I interrupted, my voice cold. "There's nothing to fix, Amy. It's already done." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and desperate. "No, please. I know I messed up, but we can still fix things. I'll do anything. I'll." "Stop," I said, cutting her off. "Just stop. I don't want your apologies. I don't want your tears. You made your choice, and now you get to live with it." She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, but I felt nothing. The woman I had married was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. I wasn't going to waste any more of my life on her. I walked past her, heading upstairs to pack my things. She didn't follow me, just stayed on the floor, crying into her hands like the broken person she was. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was certain: this was the beginning of the end. For her, at least. For me? It was just the start of something new. The hardest part about the next phase was waiting. After blowing up Amy's world, I had to let it play out for a while. She needed to watch her life unravel before I took the final step. Revenge on Amy was just the beginning. Her lover, Matt, he wasn't going to walk away from this clean either. He was going to pay for his part in tearing my family apart, and I was going to make sure of it. I spent the weekend at my brother's place, watching as the fallout hit Amy in waves. I didn't have to do much. Her friends, her family, and even the tax office were taking care of it for me. The texts from Amy came less frequently, switching from desperate apologies to long, rambling explanations. I ignored them all. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Matt had been sitting in the background, thinking he'd gotten away with it. He had no idea what was coming. By Monday morning, I was ready to set the next part of my plan in motion. It was time to ruin Matt's life the way he'd ruined mine. The first step was finding out more about him. I already knew enough to get started. He worked at a local advertising firm, had a few friends in common with Amy, and was married. Yep, married. I had found that little gem of information after digging through his social media accounts. His wife, Samantha, seemed blissfully unaware of what her husband had been up to. She posted pictures of their vacations, their new home, and endless happy couple selfies. It made me sick to look at them. I figured she deserved to know the truth. She wasn't my main target, but there was no way I was going to let Matt hide behind his marriage while sneaking around with my wife. So, I took all the evidence I had collected, screenshots of his messages with Amy, photos they had exchanged, receipts for their secret meetups, and put it all together in a neat little package. I even included a short letter explaining who I was, how I had discovered the affair, and my sincerest condolences for what she was about to learn. I mailed it directly to Samantha's office, making sure it would land in her hands without interference. Then, I waited. By Wednesday, I got confirmation that she had received it. The online tracker showed the letter was signed for at her company's front desk. I didn't expect to hear anything back from her. I wasn't doing this for closure or sympathy. This was about making sure Matt's perfect little life started crumbling from the inside. The next part of my plan was aimed directly at Matt's career. I wasn't going to let him keep playing the role of a successful professional while screwing over people in his personal life. I did some research and found out his advertising firm had a strict morality clause in their contracts. Any behavior that brought disrepute to the company could be grounds for termination. They prided themselves on their family-friendly image, running ads for major brands that focused on wholesome, all-American values. A cheating scandal involving one of their senior staff? That wouldn't fly. I gathered my evidence again, this time targeting his professional contacts. I crafted an anonymous email, attaching the incriminating screenshots, and sent it to the company's HR department. I made sure it was untraceable and sent from a public Wi-Fi network. The email included a polite but firm note explaining how Matt had been conducting an affair while representing the firm and how this behavior conflicted with their brand's image. It didn't take long for the company to react. By Friday afternoon, Matt was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. One of Amy's mutual friends, who worked at the same firm, confirmed it for me. The news spread like wildfire among his co-workers. He hadn't been fired yet, but the damage was already done. His reputation was in freefall, and his job security was hanging by a thread. But I wasn't done. Not yet. That weekend, I found out through another friend that Matt and Samantha had a big event coming up. A family reunion, no less, planned at some upscale hotel downtown. I couldn't believe my luck. This was the perfect opportunity to twist the knife even deeper. I knew they'd both be putting on a brave face, pretending nothing was wrong while their marriage crumbled behind closed doors. I decided to make a special appearance. I waited until the day of the reunion, showing up at the hotel just after the event had started. I wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, blending into the crowd as I wandered through the lobby. I wasn't there to make a scene, I just wanted to watch. To see the look on Matt's face when he realized his little secret wasn't so secret anymore. It didn't take long to find them. They were standing near the entrance to the ballroom, greeting relatives as they arrived. Samantha looked tense, her smile forced as she shook hands and hugged family members. Matt, on the other hand, was doing his best to appear relaxed, laughing and joking with his cousins like nothing was wrong. But I could see the cracks. He wasn't as smooth as he thought he was. His eyes darted around the room every few seconds, like he was expecting something or someone to jump out at him. He was nervous, and I loved every second of it. I didn't approach them. I didn't need to. Just knowing I was there, watching, was enough for me. I snapped a few pictures of the two of them, standing together in their perfect little bubble of lies, and then I slipped out of the hotel, satisfied. The next part of my plan came the following Monday. I had been biding my time, gathering more dirt on Matt, and now I had enough to send the final blow. It turned out he wasn't just cheating with Amy, he had a habit of flirting with women at work too. I found a few questionable emails he had sent to female colleagues, nothing overtly sexual, but enough to suggest inappropriate behavior. I forwarded those to HR as well, making sure to highlight how this pattern of behavior reflected poorly on the company. By Wednesday, the rumor mill had kicked into high gear. Word spread that Matt's wife had found out about the affair, and his position at the firm was on shaky ground. Some of his co-workers started distancing themselves from him, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Others were openly gossiping about what had happened. Matt, once the golden boy of the office, was now the subject of whispered conversations and side glances. It wasn't long before Matt's world came crashing down. By the end of the week, he was officially terminated from his job. Apparently, his behavior wasn't in line with the company's values, and they decided it was best to part ways. His reputation was in shambles, his marriage was falling apart, and now he had no job to fall back on. I couldn't have asked for a better outcome. But there was still one last thing I needed to do. I decided to pay Matt a visit. Not to confront him, there was no point in that. No, I just wanted him to see my face, to know that I was the one who had taken everything from him. I drove to his house late one night, parking a few houses down the street. The neighborhood was quiet, most of the lights out, except for one. The light in Matt's living room. I could see him through the window, sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. Samantha wasn't home, she had left him, according to the same mutual friend who had kept me updated throughout the week. I walked up to the house, my footsteps silent on the grass. I didn't knock. I didn't say a word. I just stood outside, watching him, waiting for him to notice me. It took a few minutes, but eventually, he looked up. His eyes met mine through the window, and for a second, I thought he might come outside. But he didn't. He just stared at me, his face pale, his expression a mix of fear and anger. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just stood there, letting him absorb the fact that his life was in ruins because of me. Then, without a word, I turned and walked back to my car. It was over. Matt's life, his marriage, his job, it was all gone. And I felt nothing but satisfaction. Revenge wasn't just about getting even. It was about making sure he understood exactly what he had done. And now, he did. It took a few days for Amy to gather the courage to reach out after everything went public. I had left her to face the fallout alone, just as I had planned. Her friends knew, her parents knew, and she had been living in the wreckage of her lies for long enough now. The only person left who hadn't officially pulled the trigger on our marriage was me. She finally texted me late one evening, asking if we could talk. I had been waiting for this. The pleading, the apologies, the last desperate attempt to salvage what was already gone. But this wasn't about reconciliation for me, this was about closure. I wasn't interested in dragging things out with more empty words or excuses. I had seen enough, heard enough. Now, it was time to make it clear that there was no going back. I agreed to meet her, but on my terms. I picked a neutral location, a small cafe on the outskirts of town. A public place where she wouldn't try to pull any emotional stunts or make a scene. I didn't want to hear any more crying or see any more of those fake tears she had mastered over the years. This wasn't about feelings anymore. This was business. I got there early, sitting by the window with a coffee, watching as she pulled into the parking lot. I had half expected her not to show up, to avoid the confrontation, but there she was. She stepped out of the car, looking a mess, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, no makeup, wearing a plain hoodie and jeans. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. And maybe she hadn't. Maybe the weight of everything had finally come crashing down on her. Good. She deserved it. She walked into the cafe, glancing around nervously before spotting me by the window. Her eyes met mine, and for a split second, I saw the guilt there, the shame. But she didn't turn around. She walked over, slowly, like she was dreading whatever was about to come next. "Hi," she said softly, sliding into the seat across from me. Her voice was quiet, barely audible over the hum of the cafe. She looked like she was about to burst into tears again, but she held it together, at least for now. "Hi," I replied, my tone neutral. I wasn't here to comfort her, and I wasn't about to pretend I cared how she felt. "You wanted to talk." She nodded, biting her lip as she stared down at the table. I don't know where to start." I waited. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. She had to face it, every single part of it. "I guess I should start with saying I'm sorry," she continued after a long pause. "I know that doesn't fix anything, and I know it probably doesn't mean much to you right now, but I really am sorry." I said nothing, just watching her as she fumbled through her words. It was almost pathetic, seeing her like this. So weak, so unsure of herself. It was a far cry from the woman who had once stood confidently beside me, who had lied to my face with such ease while sneaking around with Matt. Now, she was a shadow of that person, reduced to a blubbering mess. "I don't know how things got so out of control," she said, her voice cracking. "I never meant for any of this to happen." I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't mean for it to happen? So what, Amy? It just accidentally happened? You just fell into another man's bed by mistake?" Her face flushed, and she looked down at her hands, wringing them together. "No, I didn't mean it like that. I wasn't thinking. I was lonely, and Matt." "Matt," I cut her off sharply, the name making my skin crawl. "Don't even bring him into this." This isn't about him. This is about you and the choices you made. She flinched at my words, tears welling up in her eyes again. I know. I know it's all my fault. I take full responsibility for everything. I don't know what else to say. Then don't say anything, I snapped, my voice colder than I intended. You're not going to talk your way out of this, Amy. There's no explanation that's going to make this better. You ruined everything. You threw away our marriage, our family, for what? For some fling? Her lower lip trembled, and the tears finally spilled over. She wiped at her face with the sleeve of her hoodie, trying to hold herself together, but it was no use. The cracks were showing, and she was falling apart right in front of me. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't want this. I didn't want to lose you. Too late, I said flatly. You already did. We sat in silence for a long moment, the tension thick between us. She looked like she wanted to say more, but she didn't. Maybe she finally realized there was nothing left to say. No amount of words was going to change what she had done, and no amount of apologies was going to fix it. So, I said after a while, leaning back in my chair. Where do we go from here? Amy blinked, caught off guard by the question. I don't know, she admitted, her voice shaky. What do you want to do? I want a divorce, I said bluntly. The words hit her like a slap to the face. I watched as her eyes widened, her expression one of shock, though I couldn't understand why. Did she really think I'd be willing to forgive her after everything? Are you sure? She asked, her voice trembling. I mean, can't we at least try to? There's nothing to try, Amy, I interrupted, my voice firm. I'm done. This marriage is over. Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands, sobbing quietly. The few people in the cafe turned to look, but I didn't care. Let them stare. Let them see what a cheating wife looks like when the reality of her actions hits her in the face. I never wanted this, she mumbled through her tears. I never wanted to hurt you. Well, you did, I said simply. You hurt me. You destroyed our family. And now, you get to live with that. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. Isn't there anything I can do? Anything at all? I'll go to counseling, It's too late for that, I said, cutting her off. We're past that point. I've already made up my mind. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath, the fight draining out of her. She knew it was over. Finally. What about the kids? She asked quietly. We'll work something out, I said, my tone softening slightly. The kids were the only thing left that we had to figure out. Everything else was dead. I'm not going to take them away from you. We'll do shared custody. We'll figure it out. She nodded, her face still crumpled in sadness, but there was a slight relief in her eyes. She had been expecting me to go for full custody, to rip the kids away from her along with everything else. But as much as I hated her for what she had done to me, I wasn't going to punish the kids. They didn't deserve that. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I know I don't deserve it, but, thank you. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. We both knew there was nothing more to say. After a few minutes of silence, I stood up, leaving some money on the table for the coffee. I'll have the divorce papers drawn up this week, I said as I grabbed my coat. You'll get them soon. Amy looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. I understand. I nodded once, then turned and walked out of the cafe. I didn't look back. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It wasn't happiness, not by a long shot. But it was peace. Like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. There was no going back now. The marriage was over, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. Amy would have to deal with the consequences of her actions, and so would I. But at least now, I had control over what happened next. This was my life again, not hers. Not Matt's. Mine. I got into my car, staring at the steering wheel for a moment before starting the engine. The sound of the car roaring to life was almost soothing. Like the beginning of something new. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let Amy's betrayal destroy me. It was time to move on. Divorce papers were signed within a month. There wasn't much left to discuss after that last conversation with Amy. She tried a few more times to drag me back into pointless talks, sending long texts about how she was still willing to fight for us, but I ignored her. There was no fighting left to do. The paperwork came back from my lawyer, I signed it, and that was the end of a 12-year marriage. Once it was official, things started moving fast. We had a house, 2 kids, and a life full of shared memories that needed to be divided, but the process felt mechanical. We split custody of the kids without much fuss. I made sure to keep things civil for their sake. They didn't need to see their parents at each other's throats any more than they already had. But Amy? She was practically a ghost to me now. I barely looked at her when we met to exchange the kids, barely spoke a word beyond what was necessary. I wasn't cruel about it. I wasn't going to start fights for no reason. But the connection we'd had, the trust, the friendship, even the love, was dead. Every time I saw her, I just felt nothing. A blank space where my feelings used to be. Maybe that was the best I could have hoped for, given everything. I wasn't angry anymore, at least not the way I was in the beginning. I had done what I needed to do. Amy's life had already imploded in front of her. The only thing left was to watch it slowly burn down around her while I focused on rebuilding mine. She moved out of the house within a few months. Sold most of her things and found a small apartment across town. I had to admit, I didn't expect her to go that far, but the truth was, she couldn't afford to stay in the house on her own. Not after everything. The tax audit hit her hard, and she had to drain her savings to cover the fines. That left her scrambling to make ends meet, but I didn't care. It wasn't my problem anymore. I didn't feel guilty for what I'd done either. She had built her own prison, and now she had to live in it. I kept the house. I wanted to sell it at first, but the kids needed stability, and moving them somewhere new right after the divorce didn't seem fair. So I stayed. It was awkward at first, being in the place where we had once been a family. Every room had some reminder of the life we'd built together, photos on the walls, furniture we had picked out as a couple. But one by one, I started to get rid of things. The first to go was our wedding picture, which I took down and tossed in a box in the basement. Then the furniture went replaced piece by piece with new things I chose, without Amy's input. It felt like reclaiming my space. Every small change, every new item, was a step toward erasing her from my life. It wasn't easy, though. There were days when I'd look around and feel the weight of everything that had happened. The kids noticed it too. They tried to put on brave faces, but I could tell it was hard for them. They missed their mom, even after everything. And I couldn't blame them for that. She was still their mother, no matter what she had done to me. I made a point of being honest with them, though not brutally so. I never badmouthed Amy in front of them. As much as I wanted to scream about her betrayal, I wasn't going to drag the kids into that mess. But they weren't stupid. They knew something was off long before we told them about the divorce. Kids pick up on those things. One night, my son, Jason, asked me why Mom and I weren't together anymore. He was 10, old enough to understand that something big had happened, but not quite old enough to fully grasp it. I sat him down and tried to explain it in the simplest way I could. Your mom and we made some mistakes, I said, choosing my words carefully. And sometimes, when people make mistakes, they can't fix them. It doesn't mean we don't love you. That will never change. But it means we can't stay together the way we were. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't satisfied with that answer. He wanted more. He wanted to know the truth. But I wasn't going to put that weight on him. Not yet. What kind of mistakes? He asked quietly, looking up at me with those big, innocent eyes that made me feel like the worst father in the world for having to explain any of this. I sighed, rubbing my face. It's complicated, buddy, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But it's something between your mom and me. It doesn't have anything to do with you, okay? You're not responsible for any of this. Jason seemed to accept that, at least for the moment. But I knew there would be more questions in the future. More explanations I'd have to give when he was older and ready to understand. For now, though, he just needed reassurance. And that was something I could give him. The kids adjusted to the new routine, spending a few days a week with Amy at her apartment and the rest with me. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. The divorce took its toll on them, no doubt about that, but they were resilient. They had each other, and they had me. That was enough. As for Amy, I kept my distance. Our conversations were strictly about the kids or logistics. We'd see each other during drop-offs and pickups, exchange polite small talk, but that was it. No more late-night phone calls, no more deep conversations about life. Those days were over. She tried to apologize a few more times, especially after the reality of her situation started to sink in. She wasn't living the fantasy life she had imagined. Matt was long gone, and I'd heard through the grapevine that he had been fired from his job and dumped by his wife. He'd fallen off the radar completely, leaving Amy to deal with the aftermath of their affair on her own. At first, Amy reached out to me, trying to make amends as she put it. She left voicemails, sent long-winded texts, even dropped by the house once when she knew I wasn't home. I found a letter she'd left in the mailbox, full of regret and remorse. But I didn't read past the first paragraph. I threw it away without a second thought. I wasn't interested in her guilt or her attempts to patch things up. She had made her choices, and she had to live with them. I had made mine, and that was the end of it. Eventually, she stopped trying. She settled into her new life, focusing on her job, her apartment, and the kids. She wasn't the vibrant, confident woman she had been before the affair. She was quieter now, more reserved. I'd see her at the kids' school events or soccer games, sitting alone, watching them play with a strained smile on her face. She still loved them, I knew that much. But something had changed in her. The affair had taken its toll on her too, in ways I hadn't expected. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I was done with her. The divorce was final, and so was my connection to her beyond the kids. As time went on, I started to rebuild. I focused on my job, on being a father, and on rediscovering what life could be like without Amy. I reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years, went out for drinks, took up hobbies I had let slide during the marriage. I started going to the gym again, not for anyone else, but for me. It felt good to have control over my life again, to make decisions that were entirely my own. One night, about a year after the divorce was finalized, I went out with a group of friends. We hit up a local bar, nothing fancy, just a place to unwind after a long week. That's when I met Sarah. I hadn't been looking for anything serious. In fact, I wasn't even thinking about dating again. But there she was, funny, smart, and not tied to the baggage of my past. We hit it off right away, exchanging numbers at the end of the night. I didn't think much would come of it, but over the next few weeks, we started texting, meeting up for coffee, then dinner. Slowly, something began to form between us. It wasn't dramatic or intense, the way it had been with Amy in the early days. It was simple. Easy. And that's what I needed. Something uncomplicated. Something real. We've been seeing each other for a few months now. I haven't introduced her to the kids yet, it's too soon for that. But I'm taking it slow. I've learned my lesson about rushing into things. Looking back, I don't regret what I did to Amy. I don't regret tearing her world apart the way she tore mine. It was what needed to happen. It was the only way I could move forward, knowing that she had faced the consequences of her actions. But now it's time for me to move on, to build something new, something better. I won't let her betrayal define the rest of my life. I've got too much ahead of me to waste any more time on the past. And as for Amy? I wish her well. I hope she finds whatever it was she was looking for when she threw our marriage away. but I won't be there to see it. I'm done.